It finally feels like Europe has woken up to the idea that if Islam requires you to kill people for exercising their free speech, like, say, drawing a picture of one religious prophet or another.
Returning now to our top story, the outrage in the Muslim world over caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. Any depictions of Muhammad are offensive to the faithful.
Then your religion is fundamentally incompatible with Western values.
But in many Western nations, freedom of expression is a sacred right as well, including the freedom to express offensive ideas.
Look, we live in a tolerant and permissive society, but that doesn't extend to killing cartoonists because they offended your religion. And if you think it does, damn straight, your religion is irreconcilable with Western values. And maybe you would be happier in the land where they hang gays, behead witches, and stone adulterers.
Whether it is stoning for adultery, whatever it is, if it is from Allah and His Messenger, that is the best punishment ever possible for humankind. And that is what we should apply in the world. Who agrees with that? Allahu Akbar.
Oh yeah, throwing stones at someone till they die. That really sounds like the ruling of the most supreme and benevolent being in the universe. You see, when we first had the Danish cartoons of Muhammad, many in the mainstream media were intimidated into silence.
The decision of many media outlets, including CNN, to pixelate the images of Muhammad.
Now, I know, as well as you do, that you have not done that in order to avoid sparing the hurt feelings of my fellow guest. You've done it because you're afraid of retaliation and of intimidation.
Because while the truncheon may be used in lieu of conversation, words will always retain their power. Words offer the means to meaning, and for those who will listen, the enunciation of truth.
Now, I'd like to ask him and anyone else who agrees with him who's watching, is that the relationship they want to have with the free press? Because if we have to use this stupid word offensive, those of us who believe in the Enlightenment and the Constitution and the First Amendment are very much offended by this mad, babyish conduct. But we don't go out and kidnap the nearest Muslim we can find and take him hostage.
Including people like South Park. They succumbed to religiously motivated threats of violence by Muslims, which basically meant it was down to us, the little people, for a grassroots movement. This time, not a bit of it. Well, with the odd exception of the constantly offended social justice warriors, like feminist frequency writer Jonathan McIntosh. Oh, what's that? Intel is now partnering with Feminist Frequency in a diversity initiative.
Which is why we're making a significant investment to support diversity and inclusion in our industry. Over the next 5 years, we will invest $300 million. Together with partners and industry leaders in diversity, gaming, and education, we will make a difference.
Are you kidding me? The Feminist Frequency team, headed by a woman who claims not to be wasting police time by diverting their effort away from catching real criminals because she's in constant mortal fear of gamers. Utah State University police and administrators have been working throughout the day to assess the level of risk to students or to a speaker scheduled to visit. USU police, in conjunction with several teams of state and federal law enforcement experts, determined that there was no threat to students, staff, or the speaker, so no alert was issued. And how terrible it is, because
for Anita Sarkeesian, this is the new normal.
All that is really required to fulfill the damsel in distress trope is for a female character to be reduced to a state of helplessness, from which she requires rescuing by a typically male hero.
Armed escorts at public events, tracking her every move.
I'm constantly aware of the fact that there's an enormous amount of hate directed towards me.
Because gamers, just like Muslims, have a long and well-established history of killing critics. And this is exactly the same team that actively piss on a movement that thinks that killing cartoonists over controversial opinions is wrong. And I want to stress this. This is not some damsel first world feminist princess who wants to lecture everyone else on how privileged they are. Now, we're not talking about some professional victim looking to get on TV over some threats that the police said posed no threat. We're talking about gunmen actually turning up at a cartoonist's office and gunning people down with assault weapons. But thank God, Allah. No, even better, thank the great celestial feminist that these uber liberals, these bleeding heart liberals, are now in decline. You know, the ones who are outraged that a female character designer made Bayonetta sexy.
How do you respond to critics who say, well, this is fantasy, this is not reality, you have to lighten up?
Yeah, that's a fun argument. Games have a huge impact on our society, so it's not just fantasy. It actually works to potentially reinforce some pretty harmful messages about women.
But don't bat an eyelid at women in the real world being stoned to death in the Middle East.
Whether it is stoning for adultery, whatever it is.
Because you wouldn't want to offend their religion now, would you? That would be hate speech. These same liberals who wail in the streets of San Francisco for the poor feelings of Muslims hurt by cartoons, but go out of their way to make sure they express no outrage. In fact, the exact opposite when cartoonists are gunned down in their offices.
This isn't just good business. This is the right thing to do.
Meanwhile, there was an incredible response in France, with millions protesting on the streets of Paris alone. That's like 1/5 of the population of Paris. And 5 million copies of Charlie Hedbo have now been put out with Muhammad on the cover. Now, sure, there are still a bunch of followers of Islam who think that merely drawing cartoons of their prophet means they must kill the cartoonist. And sure, you have a load of people like the Pope saying, yeah, free speech is good, but we shouldn't offend people.
If my good friend Dr. Gaspari says a curse word against my mother, he can expect a punch. It's normal. You cannot provoke. You cannot insult the faith of others. You cannot make fun of the faith of others. There are so many people who speak badly about religions or other religions, who make fun of them, who make a game out of the religions of others. They are provocateurs, and what happens to them is what would happen to Dr. Gaspari if he says a curse against my mother. There is a limit.
Well, that's a great idea, Pope. I mean, let's explore that. I find the idea of a god asking a father to kill his son as an act of faith offensive. And seeing as this is the act of faith at the core of the Abrahamic religions, that's Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, I guess you're going to have to quit preaching your religion, because I can tell you, I find it offensive. You know, I got to admit that preaching that a man being willing to kill his son because his voice is in his head as an act of virtue is almost as offensive as advocating that in the middle of an AIDS epidemic, people shouldn't use condoms. But let's be real, this has been an iconic moment. And even the soft, we mustn't offend people social justice types like the BBC deciding that setting the precedent that surrendering your free speech simply because a religion has made people into homicidal killers is maybe not the best precedent to set. While simultaneously you have British Muslims declaring that publishing cartoons of Muhammad is an act of war. Seriously, an act of war. Well, I got news for you. If you judge whether you are winning the war by how many pictures of Muhammad are published, then you're getting your arse handed to you, because there are at least 5 million extra pictures of Muhammad in the world than there were a week ago.